Hi everyone, my name is Julie Sweat, and today I will be presenting my talk, Relationship-Centered Nostalgia Counteracts Conflict to Boost Commitment and Maintenance. This work was done in collaboration with my advisor at TCU, Dr. Kathy Cox. So to start out, what is nostalgia? Nostalgia is an emotion that we describe as a sentimental longing for the past. And although nostalgia is known as a bittersweet emotion, meaning that it has both negative and positive aspects to it, it is predominantly positive. It can be measured as a trait or a state, and either way, research has shown that it has beneficial outcomes. Some of the examples here are higher self-esteem, higher positive affect, and an increased sense of social connectedness. What's important about nostalgia is that it's highly social, meaning that most nostalgic memories that people bring to mind consist of close relationships, such as family, friends, or romantic partners. And given that nostalgia boosts psychological well-being and its content is composed of close relationships pretty often, it should have positive effects on these relationships. And that's what research has started to find. So when researchers have primed nostalgia for a personal past, people then have reported enhanced relationship satisfaction afterwards. And that it is only among people who are low in attachment avoidance, so people who are already comfortable with intimacy with others. And some researchers have started to extend this to nostalgia specifically for the past of one's relationship. This can include places visited together or intimate experiences shared with a partner. And people who score higher on this nostalgic tendency also tend to score higher on relationship satisfaction. So another key about nostalgia in the context of close relationships is that it's helpful when relationship threats are encountered. For example, when people feel lonely and then they have the opportunity to bring to mind a nostalgic memory, they'll then report higher perceived social support and belongingness. As well, when people bring to mind a current obstacle that they're managing in a friendship, the nostalgia that they are primed to experience will lead them to report higher optimism and competence to overcome those obstacles. So the question becomes, what else can nostalgia do in these relationships? The main outcome we were focusing on here was partner commitment, which I will explain in the context of the investment model. So here's a diagram showing this investment model. And as you can see, the key outcome here is commitment. And commitment is predicted by these three factors: satisfaction, investment, and alternative quality. So satisfaction is known as the positive affect experienced in a relationship. It can also refer to cost-benefit analysis of a partnership. So people who are more satisfied are the ones who perceive their relationships to have more benefits than costs. Investment refers to the tangible and intangible stock that one places in a relationship, which can be money, time, or emotional disclosure. And finally, alternative quality refers to evaluations of alternative relationship partners or situations. So people might evaluate another alternative partner or just being single as better than being with one's current partner, which would mean that their alternative quality would be high. So an extension of the commitment piece here is that as people experience higher satisfaction, higher investment, and lower alternative quality, they'll experience higher commitment, which then predicts endorsement of these relationship maintenance mechanisms. So these are cognitions or behaviors that people can engage in to promote the well-being of their relationship. And these are some examples here on the side, including accommodating one partner, forgiving them, being willing to sacrifice for them, idealizing them, feeling a sense of interdependence or oneness with a partner, as well as devaluing alternatives. So in the current studies, we wanted to just start out by examining whether nostalgia was associated with commitment. So commitment is an important factor to study because of all of the pieces of the relationship investment model that I showed you, commitment is the one that predicts relationship longevity, the duration of the relationship, as well as the health later on. So we wanted to see if these two components could be related. We then wanted to extend this to an experimental design and see if when we prime nostalgia, that could impact people's reports of commitment. We also wanted to bring in the conflict component here. So as I mentioned, nostalgia is highly beneficial in response to threats to the self or threats to a relationship. So one of the threats that's most common in relationships is conflict. So we wanted to see if nostalgia could help overturn conflict to boost commitment. Study 3, very similar. We just wanted to, again, manipulate nostalgia to look at these dependent variables, but we also wanted to see if it could extend to maintenance behaviors. So for study 1, this one was very simple. We just had MTurf workers who are in romantic relationships complete first the relationship nostalgia scale. So we described nostalgia for them and gave them several items that might make them feel nostalgic for their relationship. And then we asked them how nostalgic each item made them feel. For example, quality time that you spent together. We also administered the commitment subscale of the investment model scale. For example, I'm committed to maintaining my relationships with my partner. So the results showed us that there was a positive correlation between relationship nostalgia and commitment, which shows us that, importantly, nostalgia is linked to the intent to persist in a relationship. As mentioned, this is important because commitment is the factor that research has shown over and over again is predictive of relationship longevity as well as maintenance behaviors. We still don't know the causal direction though. So again, going back to this study outline, are the two concepts related? Yes, but we want to see this in an experimental design. So in study 2, we again had participants in relationships complete the survey, starting with the relationship conflict scale, again, to get at this threat piece of the nostalgia model. So this, for an example, would be my partner and I have a lot of disagreements. They were then randomly assigned to a relationship nostalgia positive or ordinary writing condition. So I'll show you some pieces of those writing prompts that people followed. So on the left side, we've got the nostalgia prime. We asked them to think of a past event that has meaning for their relationship and makes you feel nostalgic. People in the positive condition just brought to mind a positive or a happy event. And then finally, the ordinary control condition was just a regular daily event that people had recently experienced. We then gave them a manipulation check just to make sure that our manipulation was effective, which it was. We then administered again the investment model scale, the commitment subscale, as well as the satisfaction subscale, just to see if the results would also extend to the measure of satisfaction, although commitment was really the main factor that we were interested in analyzing. So this is what my analysis plan looks like. I wanted to look at the interaction between conflict and writing condition on commitment, and then just satisfaction as an exploratory measure as well. So I'll show you the commitment results. So we've got conflict here on the x-axis, and we've got commitment on the y-axis. Each of these lines here represents the relationship between conflict and commitment in each of the conditions. The interaction here was significant when I was looking at the nostalgia and the positive conditions and comparing those two. So as you can see, all three of the conditions have this negative slope in their line. So commitment decreased as conflict increased. And what's important here is where that red oval is. So at high conflict, nostalgia, the people in the nostalgia group scored higher on commitment compared to the participants in the positive condition. And there was no significant interaction when I was looking at satisfaction as the dependent variable. So this is all specific to measures of commitment. So as conflict increased, partner commitment was highest among participants who are in a nostalgic state, which provides evidence that relationship nostalgia can be experimentally manipulated. But importantly, that nostalgia can act as a psychological resource in the face of relationship threat. In this case, this is partner conflict. So now I want to see if this can extend to relationship maintenance mechanisms. So we found the association in study 1, we found the effect in study 2, and now we want to see what the carryover effects are. Going back to this diagram I showed you earlier, we're looking now to see if commitment can increase these relationship maintenance mechanisms when conflict was high and when people were nostalgic. So the overview of study 3, we again had workers in relationships complete the same relationship conflict scale as in study 2, same random assignment to writing condition, manipulation check, and investment model scale. The new part here is these maintenance behavior scales that we gave them. So we focused on a few in particular. One was constructive accommodation, which refers to the loyalty and the forgiveness and the patience that people can use when they're accommodating their partner's errors, as opposed to starting a fight or threatening to leave a relationship, for example. We also measured idealization and a sense of oneness. So that's looking at a sense of interdependence or overlap between a person and their partner. All right, so to look at this, this is an overview of my data analysis, and I wanted to see whether the interaction between conflict and writing condition would affect commitment, and then whether this commitment could then extend to predict these maintenance mechanisms. So I used M+ to perform a structural equation model on the data. And I used the MLM estimator to account for some non-normal distribution of the data. I also didn't have any missing data. So I was able to find a good model fit here. The RMSEA and the CFI and the SRMR are all valid and acceptable measures of good model fit. And you can even see that the chi-squared value is nearing the good value, the significance value there, even with such a large sample size. So now I'm going to show you what this looks like in each of the different groups, because what I really wanted to look at was this model as a whole, but also the differences in these effects, both direct and indirect, between the conditions. So between the nostalgia, positive, and ordinary conditions, which would tell me if the nostalgia manipulation had a significant effect on these dependent variables. So first, this is the nostalgia condition. All these paths here, you can see the standardized betas are all significant at least a 0.03 level. Same thing here with the positive condition. So some of these paths you can see are a little bit different, but the overall pattern of results is the same. And all three of these conditions, here's the ordinary one as well, these indirect effects, again, for all three conditions, the indirect effects between conflict, commitment, and these maintenance mechanisms individually were all significant. And then as I mentioned, M+ allowed me to look at the differences in indirect effects between conflict and each of the maintenance behaviors while controlling for all the other variables in the model. And then I was also able to directly compare the indirect effects across conditions. So looking at mediation, but comparing between groups. Doing this, I found the only indirect effect that was significantly different between conditions was the oneness, which I'll show you here. So there was a significant difference between the two conditions, nostalgia and positive indirect effects when predicting oneness. And this positive beta value here shows us that the nostalgia conditions oneness was higher than the positive conditions reports of oneness. So that shows us that this indirect effect was significant because of the nostalgia manipulation, and the oneness was higher because of this heightened commitment that the nostalgia caused. And the same pattern here, looking at nostalgia versus ordinary. So that positive beta tells us that the nostalgia group had higher oneness as a result of the heightened commitment that they experienced. So that's an important outcome of nostalgia. All right, so to sum up, structural equation modeling tested how nostalgia interacted with conflict to affect commitment and down the line maintenance behaviors. The commonly expected indirect effects were achieved, such that greater conflict led to worse relationship outcomes in all three conditions, so no conditional indirect effects there. But then what we saw that was different was that as conflict increased, participants who were primed with nostalgia reported higher oneness compared to those who were primed with one of the other two control prompts. All right, so to sum up, we found that people who are more nostalgic for their relationships are also more committed. We also found that when we manipulated relationship nostalgia, That feeling helped to buffer the negative effects of conflict when that conflict was high. And then finally, in study 3, the commitment that was boosted by nostalgia at high conflict increased a sense of oneness, so a feeling of interconnectedness and overlap with the partner. From an investment model standpoint, protecting commitment is highly beneficial because that's the main predictor of relationship duration and health. And it's also important because while a lot of literature has shown us that commitment is important, we don't have a lot of data that shows us how to improve commitment. So nostalgia appears to be a viable candidate for this. So looking forward, I think we should definitely be doing longitudinal research to see if people who are more nostalgic over time become more committed over time and whether that can actually improve the duration of the relationship. In addition to conflict, I think we should integrate other threats against which nostalgia can protect. So potentially being too distant from a partner, as well as maybe being too close or spending a lot of time with a partner, such as in the COVID pandemic, when we're spending a lot of time with our people that we live with or are in relationships with. I'd also like to tailor this to specific demographics of people, including different ethnicities, SES, and relationship duration. So people who are already married versus people who are maybe dating or engaged. So thank you very much for listening to my talk.